Thank you, everyone, for coming out here on weekday evening to the Progressive Mayoral Debate. Thank you, everybody. My name is Gabriel Markoff with the San Francisco Progressive Alliance. I'll be co-moderating this evening along with Carolina Morales, co-chair of the Harvey Milk LGBTQ Democratic Club. And we have a pretty special program going here. We're going to do it in forum style. We'll have representatives from each of the clubs. And so let me just talk a little bit about how it's going to work. There is, of course, the bathroom code and Wi-Fi password are on the wall by the door, important information. And then we will have 3 minutes for each candidate to introduce themselves. They'll be speaking alone, one at a time, starting with Angela Alioto, who is our first one here. Thank you, Angela, so much for joining us. And so the last bit on format is 3 minutes for introductions. There will then be 20 minutes for representatives of the co-sponsors of this event to ask questions with about 2 minutes for each answer. If we have time, we'll then have several minutes of audience questions, followed by 1 minute for closing statement by the candidate. Just the co-sponsors of tonight's event are the San Francisco Burning Crats, Latino Democratic Club, San Francisco Progressive Alliance, Progressive Democrats of America, San Francisco, the Harvey Milk Club, SF for Tomorrow, the SF Green Party, South Beach G6 Democratic Club, Latino Young Democrats, and San Francisco for Democracy. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Let me turn it over to Carolina.
Yay!
Welcome again, everybody. Thank you for being here tonight. We have a very important task in our hands. We're going to be electing a new mayor for our beautiful city. We have a very short time to make sure that we ask the right questions, that we get to know the candidates, that we know what they stand for and what their platforms are about. So we are excited you are here, and we thought it was very, very important to have an event so amazing like this one, bringing together so many organizations that represent many identities and ways of thinking in San Francisco. And we think, of course, this is important because the future of our city is in our hands. We have a big issue with cities. We have a big affordability crisis, homelessness crisis, both in our city and in our state. And we must, and criminal legal system issues, of course. And we need to make sure that we are asking tough questions, that we're being very clear and pushing forth as progressives an agenda and issue to shift the direction that our city has been going in for the past maybe 6 years. So thank you so much and welcome.
Thank you. Without further ado, we will turn over to Angela. And so, Angela, I would ask for the first 3 minutes, we'll have a timer up here. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're running for mayor of San Francisco? Thank you.
Hi, everybody. It's good to be back. As I was just telling Calvin, it's been, 20, 30 years we've been coming to this building. I've had some very, very exciting evenings here, to say the least. My name is Angela Alioto. I'm running for mayor of San Francisco, principally because of, in my opinion, what is considered to be one of the biggest disgraces in the United States of America, and that is our poor people living on the streets of our city, in pure poverty, in illness, in just incredibly rich city with so many people living on the streets. This is something that I've worked on my whole life, and in 2004 to 2009, we did an amazing job with permanent supportive housing, meaning putting people into a unit with a minute clinic in the bottom floor of that unit, and it's housing. It isn't something that's going to kick you out. It isn't 6 months. It isn't 120 days. It's permanent supportive housing. So the homeless tents was really what made me think that I would run in 2019 to take care of this situation that I don't think is going to get taken care of if I don't win this race, and I mean that from the bottom of my heart. The other biggest issues in this race are housing, and those issues are very, very, very difficult issues. I know Scott Wiener has some proposals or legislation that I've looked at. They make me very nervous. I am not for it, as some people suggested coming in, because I don't think it's finished, and I don't know whether I could ever be for that kind of housing on, for example, Geary Street without, unlimited height is, even if it's 8 stories or 11 stories, it's pretty formidable. I mean, we're going to change the whole look of our city. I don't think so. So but housing is the biggest issue in this race if you're not talking about homelessness. Okay, good. And so it is the biggest issue, and of course crime, breaking into the cars, but more importantly, the violent crime that's occurring in our city is yet again something that's pretty new in the sense of the last 2 or 3 years, and it's something that's simply not acceptable. We have one of the most beautiful cities in the world, and whether it's our flower stands, so something that my analogy of taking away our flower stands is silly, it isn't silly at all. It's tearing away at the soul of our city. It's like not allowing the 50-year anniversary of the Summer of Love. That is tearing away at the soul of our city. We are who we are, and we can't have some of the bureaucrats in these departments who literally have to go, cannot be telling the citizens of the city that they can or cannot do things that are fundamentally the soul of San Francisco. Thank you.
We're going ahead now with our question and answer period, and so we have representatives from each of the clubs that will be asking one question at a time to the candidates.
Hi, I'm John Mark Shandonia. I'm on the County Council of the San Francisco Green Party. Our question for Angela Alioto is, in the 2003 mayoral runoff, your endorsement of Gavin Newsom over Matt Gonzalez, after Newsom offered you the symbolic position of vice mayor, may have been the deciding factor in that race. Do you regret that endorsement, and can you tell us whether you used your position as vice mayor to accomplish anything positive?
Yes, I did. I don't regret it for a second. We housed 11,432 people who were living on our streets. The report from our housing, the report of our 10-year plan to end chronic homelessness is on the San Francisco website, and we did one hell of a job helping the poor people of our city get into units and get medical supportive care in the form of minute clinics on the bottom floor of some of our buildings. We were building 17 buildings. We only got to build 8 or rehab 8. We've got to fill 8. And the lack of recidivism in those 8 is 94%. So I don't regret it for 1 second. I'm extremely proud of my homeless work, and I consider it to be a duty to take care of the men and women of our city in any way that I can. Just as a little aside, Matt Gonzalez at the time, I was going to a press conference where he was endorsing me as the president of the Board of Supervisors. So I'm sitting there, I'm running for mayor, I'm president of the Board of Supervisors, and he was supposed to be endorsing me as mayor. As I sat there, he announces his candidacy against me. So quite frankly, it would have been a little difficult for me to have ever endorsed someone that was quite that dishonest. And then a week later, my campaign manager, Ross Mercarimi, took all of my polling and things that we put money into in studying and took them over to Matt's campaign. I mean, so please, I don't want to hear about Matt Gonzalez, the wonderful guy. It's not going to happen in my lifetime, okay? It's not.
Okay, I'm Joni Eisen on the board of San Francisco Tomorrow, and we're concerned about an issue that hasn't been coming up much in the debates, and it really should because it affects all of us. How serious are you about reversing climate change? San Francisco has a stated goal of relying on 100% renewable energy by 2030. If you recognize the urgency of this issue, given that 92% of our current carbon footprint comes from transportation and buildings, what actions would you direct to meet that goal of 2030, 100% renewable, or earlier?
Well, I would absolutely support the 2030 goal. I have been a big climate change person in the sense that in the last 4 years I've participated in the seminars at the Vatican with Pope Francis, who came out with his climate change, and then I participated in the Paris 20 meetings about the climate, and then we did a huge campaign across the eastern part of the United States from June to October of 2015, advertising the Laudate Si climate control document that was put out, that was also ratified at the Paris meetings. So I have been as much of an advocate for climate control and all of the fossil fuels and the footprint and all of the issues that concern what we're doing to Mother Earth and how we are destroying her every day. So I would be a very, very strong advocate. I'm not sure I got that last question though, because of the three.
Well, it's just what actions do you take? What is this plan? What actions do you take to meet the goal or come in?
Well, I could answer that in a half an hour maybe, but let me just say that from transit, the transit hubs, the type of transit we're using, whether we're using light rail, whether we're using buses, our buses are old, they all need renovations. There's so many areas, everything from garbage cans. I was doing a piazza in North Beach, and the garbage cans in our piazza were run by solar, and it would turn the garbage into a little cube. And it would totally environmentally green piazza. The whole city should be totally environmentally green.
Hi, Angela. I'm Ben Becker, co-chair of the San Francisco Burning Rats. Thank you for coming. I wanted to ask you about this idea of a public bank. Do you support the creation of a public bank with the intention of using it to finance affordable housing? If so, will you sponsor the legislation to ensure that discussion is no longer held up in the Board of Supervisors as it has been?
I think overruling the Board of Supervisors won't be all that difficult, quite frankly. I mean, you know, done it before, been there, done it, had to do it so many times, even with the minor things, like when I created the Youth Commission. The board voted against it, I went to the ballot, the people of San Francisco voted for it. 78%, as a matter of fact, including the reallocation of specific funding in our budget. So I would absolutely promote the bank for those purposes, and I quite frankly believe that I am the only coalition builder that is in this particular race. The city doesn't talk to tech, tech doesn't talk to government, government isn't talking to the community. I believe a coalition put together for the purposes of advocating for the bank is what the answer is, to make everybody have a vested interest in the fact that it get done. So, yes, I would be a strong advocate, and I don't believe that the Board of Supervisors would stop me. I just don't think so.
Angela,
Do I
hi.
get my extra seconds allocated to my next question? Okay.
Hello, Angela.
Hi.
My name's Art Persico. I'm with Progressive Democrats of America, San Francisco. And we formulated a question in advance, so bear with me. In the context of great income inequality in San Francisco, what proposals do you have that could address the issue of homelessness specifically, as well as creating affordable housing for the larger population? You've talked a little bit about permanent supportive housing
Right.
for the homeless,
Right.
But how would you go about that? And what steps would you take to deal with the San Francisco housing crisis specifically?
Well, let me just say the housing crisis is one of the most complicated issues I think that's happening right now. Because whether it's housing for the formerly homeless, or whether it's below affordable housing, or whether it's affordable housing, or market value housing, or luxury housing, it all has to be, in my opinion, analyzed and included in every single building that goes up in this city. There ought to be percentages for each allocation. We just came from a building yesterday that had 30% formerly homeless, and then below market value, affordable housing and below affordable housing over on Fulton Street. And it absolutely functions, and I think it's a fabulous idea. It works. But when it comes to homelessness, okay, my plan is called RAPID. And the concept is, from the moment that you meet a homeless person, Right now, the largest growing homeless population in the United States of America and in San Francisco and California is the unaccompanied woman, 60% of whom have been sexually abused. So they have all sorts of mental issues to make themselves uglier so that nobody approaches them. It's a phenomenon that has been studied in depth. I just read the report on it. So people like that would be the easiest people to take off. You need to add those extra. Thank you. People like that would be the first to take off the street. Anyone that's been on the street for 90 days or less hasn't yet hurt the brain cells. The brain cells start to deteriorate after 90 days of malnutrition. Okay? So the goal would be to take those on the street off as soon as they get on the street. You know, there's also a preventative prong. But then the city needs to go meet people and within 48 hours have them off the street. Now, yesterday I went to a press conference. I felt like I was kind of in Mundo Bizarro because Senator Wiener, who's a very nice guy, and London Breed, nice lady, they were at a press conference recommending conservatorship. Conservatorship is like in the 40s and the 50s where you are tied up. If you're schizophrenic and you have a bad 2 hours in the afternoon, you should not have a conservator. A conservator is 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So I want you all to really take a good look at that legislation, that conservatorship legislation, before you endorse it, because, you know, they're saying it's only 60 to 90 to 100 people. That's 60 to 90 to 100 human beings. Again? Human beings. So please take a look at that. But I'll get you my homeless plan. It's called RAPID.
Next question, please.
Thank you for coming to speak to us, Angela. My name is Kevin with the Latino Democratic Club. So our question is, with the current housing crisis the city is facing, people of color are disproportionately affected the most as victims of displacement and gentrification. Over 10,000 Latinos have been displaced currently in this neighborhood, and the number's only growing. 70% of our homeless have been evicted, yet as a city we have more empty units than people. So as mayor, will you commit to implement a monthly vacancy tax that will fund affordable housing projects on all units that have been vacant for 9 months and more to pressure landlords to not hold empty units? If so, how will you work to enforce this? If not, why?
Well, first of all, yes, I would. And that also goes for all these vacant businesses. I think that's something that really has to be looked at, a vacancy tax, and which we are studying right now, though we're nowhere near completed. But absolutely, I would advocate for the legislation for apartments that are remaining vacant just because they're waiting for whether we're Russian, whether we're Italian, whether we're Irish, it's running us out. And that's something that I absolutely would advocate for legislation to stop, because the concept, reminds me a little of Care Not Cash, not to go back to Care Not Cash, which I was not for in that race, has all these empty beds, right, because they're contracted for, and then there's a line down the block of poor people that are dying to have a bed because it's freezing cold or it's raining. That's exactly what that reminds me of. All those empty apartments, people are out in the street and would pay rent. We're not talking about anybody giving us anything. We are in a city of billionaires. We need to get these billionaires to start paying attention to what we believe they ought to be giving to.
Hi, my name is Francesca Gallardo.
Hi, Francesca, beautiful name.
Thank you. I'm on the executive board of the Latino Young Democrats of San Francisco, and we want to know, how do you plan to preserve and empower the remaining Hispanic Latinx community of San Francisco, and not just theoretically, but tangible policy initiatives?
Well, first of all, I wrote the sanctuary law. I wrote the first sanctuary law that went, statewide and then nationally. And we wrote that because they were raiding, INS at the time, that's now called ICE, was raiding the Club Elegante and deporting people that night and leaving their children in their homes. So I have been a big advocate for the DACA students and for keeping people who are running away from a situation, whether it's because they're gay and they're not accepted in the country they're in, or it's because they're running away from wars in their country. We, the city of San Francisco, are a sanctuary for them, and there should be no question about it. So I would advocate in any way possible to make sure that our Latina community is listened to and able to say in this city. It all goes back to housing. It all goes back to how we allocate these percentages. And again, I'm no expert in housing, but how we allocate these percentages when the developers are building the new housing. I'm sure we can make it profitable to them, which is the issue, and still be able to have housing in some way or shape or form that would be affordable to the people of San Francisco that want to live here. And I also want to talk about my Uber tax, but that's the next. Hopefully I'll get asked something about traffic. Woo.
Hello? Oh, there we go. Hi, Angela. My name is Brad Chapin. I'm on the board of the Harvey Milk Democratic Club.
Go team. I knew Harvey well.
Great. So we have a pre-prepared question, so bear with me here. So on any given day, 85% of people in San Francisco jails are pre-trial. This means that they have not yet been convicted of any charge, and a significant portion are imprisoned simply because they cannot afford bail. San Francisco has some of the highest bail amounts in the country. What would be your approach to addressing this high percentage of pre-trial imprisoned people?
Pre-trial, you have a constitutional right. I'm a civil rights lawyer, and I know a lot about the jails. You have a constitutional right for a speedy trial. So the question is, what is going on with both the public defender and the district attorney's office when people are not getting the speedy trial that they should have that otherwise would have them out of jail one way or the other, or plea bargaining one way or the other. So that has to be looked at. The crowd crowded jails is also a huge issue, and it also then gets down to how everybody is treated. But as far as I'm concerned, that's a public defender, a district attorney question as to why these cases are not going to trial. Now, why our bail is higher than other cities, I have to tell you, I've never heard that before. I didn't know that, it's not something that I can answer because I don't know about it. But let me just say that arresting people for quality of life crimes, like sleeping, blocking a doorway, putting a cardboard box over your head, falling asleep in a park or on a park bench, arresting them and making poverty criminal is unconscionable, especially in our city, in the United States. And there are a lot of things unconscionable. It makes them criminals. They don't know what a warrant means. They end up not going to the warrant, and then they're arrested, and, poverty's not a crime.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Gabriel from San Francisco Progressive Alliance. My question is, Kaido O'Neill, Alex Nieto, Jessica Williams, Mario Woods. These are just a few of the black and brown men and women killed by the San Francisco police in the past several years. Do you support or oppose District Attorney Gascon's decision not to prosecute killer cops? And what would you do to end the string of police violence that stalks the streets of San Francisco?
I am, and I have always been a law enforcement person. I am also a civil rights attorney who has represented 80% of the over 700 people I've represented in the last 18 years are African American. I have a clear understanding of the constant abuse and constant denigration. I differ from my colleagues on this issue when it comes to tasers. I think that tasers with a solid education and rooting out the officers in the department that have more than 2 disciplinary actions against them is the way to handle the police department. The police department is something that you want to be able to call If your 2-year-old child is choking, you want to call 911 and know they're going to come and help you. You want to believe in your police department. The lack of trust in the police department from the citizens and in certain circumstances, well deserved, no question about it, but there are ways of changing that and making it so that the people do regain trust in their police officers. As far as Gascon goes, you know, we need to have a new district attorney. And we need to have a couple of new department heads too.
Thank you, club representatives. I think that, do we have one? Oh, we have one.
So we have one more question.
But on the whole, everybody, San Francisco's had an excellent police department. On the whole, San Francisco, I know how you feel, but on the whole, when you need someone to come get you, San Francisco Police Department has been there. And again, those that are not good guys, that don't have good records, need to be severely looked at.
My name is Stephen Jaffe. I'm the president of the South Beach District 6 Democratic Club. Good evening. My question from our club is, what will you as mayor do to rid San Francisco politics of dark money?
You know, I signed the oath early on, and I have to tell you, I am an independent candidate. I always have been, and I've always had machines running against me who seem to have so much money, it isn't even funny. I cannot believe, for example, there was a recent ad that was put on by a women's group. As a woman, I resent that. I think that's nonsense. I don't want to know that it's put on by women. I want to know the names. I want everybody's name that had anything to do with that video. I want everybody's name that has anything to do with any independent expenditure. I see Amy here in the front running for mayor. Amy and I want a level playing field. We don't want one candidate to have $5 million when we're trying to live by the rules. We want a level playing field. And it just simply isn't fair, because everything from visibility to, you know, I guess one of my opponents is going to have TV ads and everything, and nobody knows who's paying for it. Let me just make one statement. You better believe whoever's paying for that is the person that wins the mayor's race if that candidate wins. That's who's running the city. Those people have been running the city for quite a while. It's now time to take back the city and bring back the soul of our city instead of letting it be run by people who are millionaires or billionaires just because they can. We have to tell them, you can't this time, and we want to know your name.
All right. Ooh, excuse me. I think we have time for one audience question and then a closing statement. Can we get somebody to ask a question here?
Hi. It's only been 40 years.
And onward.
Onward and upward.
Okay. The health workers who are the cutting edge of the people on the street, the homeless, were privatized unanimously by the Board of Supervisors. Their numbers were cut in half. They lost their unions and they lost their numbers. Would you support putting them back in the Department of Health?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I'm supported by the healthcare workers, and I always have been supported by the healthcare workers. But more important, when you privatize them, you really don't know what they're doing. And they're not unionized, and the workers themselves don't have benefits and are mistreated. And we, the city, it's our duty and obligation to take the poor people off the street. It's our duty and obligation. It is not the duty and obligation of independent contractors. This whole city budget is $10 billion. I'm willing to bet a good $2 to $3 billion can be taken off of it. Because there is so much waste, and all this independent contracting, whether it's the city attorney's office or the district attorney's office, when you have 175 attorneys in the city attorney's office, why do you have to subcontract out for 50 more attorneys? In other words, what do we just have all this money, but we have all this poverty on our streets? No, I absolutely would, before taking it back into the health department. Our health department is one department that really works hard at its best because it loves our city, and you can tell. Whereas DPW, MTA, I mean, please. I don't know anything about housing, Calvin. Housing. Oh, yes.
So you were going to talk about Uber.
Oh, what I want to...
But before you do, I was going to ask you to solve the problem of the SFMTA, how it might be divided up in order to be more successful.
You know, SFMTA is
What's the question? Repeat the question.
Repeat the question.
well. He asked how I can't repeat it as eloquently as you do. How SFMTA should be divided up.
That's it. That's
So
it.
it's SFMTA, and SFMTA is one of the departments I have a really big issue with. Okay, all I would ask as mayor of the city is, number one, we need new department heads that are going to do what the department requires. In other words, if you're head of DPW, clean the streets. Okay? It would take a month and a half to 2 months to clean our streets. There's a lot of innovation in this city. I'm sure we can do something about the garbage cans that are spilled all over. There's a lot of innovation in this city. I'm sure we can do something about the amount of people that dump their garbage on the streets. MTA needs to do the job. DPW needs to do the job that they're supposed to be doing. MTA needs to have some kind of plan. I mean, they close streets. It's so stunning to me. They close streets when the other street is closed. And so there's gridlock all over town with all of these closed streets. And then they closed the Broadway Tunnel for what, 2 years now? They've been working on the Broadway Tunnel. So I said to the worker the other day, let me ask you something. When are you going to finish this street? I'm just curious. He goes, we have a contract that has more money in it, so we're going to undo what we did across the street and then redo it because we have to spend the money that's in the contract. I said, I've got a lot of places where you can spend that money, you know, I mean, and in my position, I can't do anything about it. As mayor of San Francisco, they'd never get those independent contracts that are based on sole source exemptions that don't exist, okay? That don't exist. So, to dig a hole, you know, I'll get Uber, but to dig a hole on Market Street and call it a sole source exemption, like you've got to be Picasso to get a sole source exemption. Those are contracts that go without a competitive bid, where the quality is low and the efficiency, again. Okay. All right. Can I mention Uber? Take me 30 seconds. Uber, Lyft, Chariot, whatever, comes into town, 60 to 70,000 cars on the street. They are coming into town to what? To a business. They need a business tax.
Right on.
They need a business tax. They're using our streets, our lousy infrastructure, and the traffic is out of control. And they should be getting out of their cars and getting on rapid transit instead of ruining our streets. So they need a business tax that goes towards the infrastructure of our city.
So we see
Thank you all very, very much.
Hold on, you get 1 minute for your closing, and then you can do it in that too. Sorry, we did start a few minutes late, so we're making sure that every candidate gets the 30 minutes we allotted. We have time to the schedule. Angela, thank you so much. 1 minute to close.
1 minute. Well, thank you all very, very much for inviting me here tonight. Everybody said, I couldn't believe it. Everybody said, you know, I don't know if you go see those progressives. I said, hold the phone. I was the P in Progressive 20 years ago, okay? I did medicinal marijuana. I did needle exchange. I did sanctuary. I did all the ADAP with the great help of Harry Britt. Harry Britt and I did, I did the smoking ban. I lost a lot of friends with that one, but I did the smoking ban. Think of all the lives that are saved. So, you know, when it comes to me not being a progressive or me not being a moderate or me not being a conservative, I don't want a name on me. I'm a San Franciscan. I want the streets clean. I want housing for people that love our city, not for people that are using it to have a job. I want people who love our city and want to work in San Francisco and have everything from the clean streets to, again, The flower stands. When they came and took away the flower stands because the Board of Supervisors put restrictions on them where they couldn't make money, when I saw that DPW, I'm walking out, I saw that DPW truck pick up a flower stand in front of Gumps that had been there for 60 years, I thought, you know, it's the dent, it's the broken window in the homeless crisis, it's the beginning of the end. You all need to elect me as the next mayor of San Francisco, and we're going to put Humpty Dumpty back together again, our way.
Thank you so much, Angela, for coming out tonight.
Okay, I am introducing the next candidate, but I see that we have a lot more folks in the room. This is very exciting. Thank you for coming tonight once again and showing love to our city on this day of love. It's my pleasure to introduce former Senator Mark Leno. Just as a reminder, in terms of our format, we will give the candidate 3 minutes for introduction statements. Then each of our representatives from progressive clubs will pose one question, and the candidate will have 2 minutes. We'll be helping between Gabriel and I to continue taking time, and then you will have 1 minute for closing statements. Welcome.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for all the time and effort it takes to bring so many folks together so we can have a good participation in democracy, which is what this is all about. So I am Mark Leno, and I'm the only candidate in the race who is a small business owner, and for 40 years, I should say, and has served not only on the County Board of Supervisors for 4 years, but also 6 years in the State Assembly and 8 years in the State Senate. And I'm proud to say that those 14 years were very accomplished legislative years. I wasn't just taking up space, I was moving forward very progressive and groundbreaking legislation. I'm also the only legislator since the advent of term limits in 1996 in the state legislature to have 14 consecutive years of 100% voting record with the California Labor Federation. And that's because I respect and want to dignify the work of every woman and every man in California. I was able to author the nation's first $15 an hour minimum wage. And for the first time, thank you, first time we've got an escalator in it. So once we get to 15, it will be finally above the federal poverty line. And because of the COLA adjustment every year, it will stay above the federal poverty line. It will no longer be legal to pay a sub-poverty wage in California. I also was able to author single-payer universal health care reform. Not once, but twice. We didn't get it to the governor's desk, but we moved the ball forward. And don't let anyone ever suggest that there is not enough money in our health care system to afford single-payer. There is more than enough. The World Health Organization ranks us 37th among nations in access to health care, quality of health care outcomes, cost of health care, life expectancy rates, and infant mortality rates. 37th. If that wasn't bad enough, we pay twice per capita what our Western trading partners pay. And so there is money in that system if we take out the for-profit middleman that provides no health care, does no medical research, and doesn't provide one hospital bed. Also, was able to amend California's Fair Employment and Housing Act to include gender identity. So our transgender brothers and sisters and anyone gender non-conforming will no longer be discriminated against in housing, employment, and public accommodation. Beyond that, amended the Ellis Act. No other legislator in California has amended the Ellis Act. We did that by exempting single-room occupancies, SROs, so that 12,000 of San Francisco's most vulnerably housed, those this close to homelessness, will no longer be at risk of wholesale eviction. And as mayor, how much time do we have left? Oh, we're there. Okay, I want to be respectful of your time.
Great, thank you. So we're going to start with questions. We'll start on this side this time.
Hello, Senator Leno.
Good evening.
I have been and will continue. My name's Art Persico. I'm with the Progressive Democrats of America, San Francisco, and I have been and will continue to ask the same question of each candidate here tonight.
Yes.
In the context of great income inequality in San Francisco, what proposals do you have that could address the issue of homelessness specifically, as well as creating affordable housing for the larger population?
And do I have a time limit on each question? 2 minutes. Talk about homelessness in 2 minutes. Okay, that's better than 60 seconds I had the other day.
And affordable housing.
And affordable housing. Thank you. All right. Well, with regard to homelessness, we know that our homeless population is very diverse, many reasons why someone finds his or her way to live without shelter. And we know that about 70% of San Franciscans living on our streets without shelter were living under a roof in San Francisco before they became homeless. So step one, make sure that those who have a home keep them in their homes. And that's where I was about to continue with the Ellis Act. Speculators are abusing a law that was written as a right for landlords. Speculators who don't intend to go out of the business of being a landlord, they don't even pretend to be. And I would take them to court. We have to stop Ellis Act evictions entirely. We are not treating those who are on our streets with mental health issues, and I think some of the most egregious sites that we see on our streets right now of people suffering are also methamphetamine caused. We know what meth can do over long-term use. And so rather than recycle folks who have health issues, mental health, behavioral health, drug addiction, alcohol addiction, through our criminal justice system, 50% of those in our county jail are getting mental health services, 20% psychotropic drugs. It's the largest provider of mental health services in the county, our county jail. That is wrong. It should stop. And the idea, if I just may finish real quickly, is to create, look at creating, I need more detail, a mental health justice center so that we could treat people rather than put them in jail. All right. We'll get to affordable housing later.
Well, speaking of affordable housing, my name is Kevin Ortiz with the Latino Democratic Club, and so we want to thank you for your time being here. So our question is, with the current housing crisis the city is facing, people of color are disproportionately affected the most as victims of displacement and gentrification. Over 10,000 Latinos have been displaced in this neighborhood currently, and the number is only growing. Like you said, 70% of our homeless have been evicted. Yet, as a city, we have more empty units than we have people. As a mayor, will you commit to implement a monthly vacancy tax that will fund affordable housing projects on all units that have been vacant for 9 months or more to pressure landlords to not hold empty units? If so, how will you work to enforce this? And Ms. Alioto actually brought up a really good point as well. Would you support that vacancy tax as a business owner as well, for small businesses?
Yes, without a doubt, for both. For example, in my neighborhood, we have a lot of retail vacancies, and of course, a lot of the new development that's going up, a lot of this market rate development with some inclusionary, have ground floor retail. So we have actually a surplus of ground floor retail right now, and landlords, often out of town, pension funds and other entities that buy these things as investments, will not come down in their prices. So it's a strange twist on the market economy where you have more supply and prices keep going up. So yes, you keep those units empty, you're causing blight. You have to mitigate the damage that your vacancy is causing. That's why the vacancy tax is important. And with regard to the residential development, we know so many of these units are just safety deposit boxes in the sky. These are not being bought to be lived in. I've got a friend who asked me recently, remember the old days when people actually had housing to live in? There was not a commodity, it was not an investment. I authored the inclusionary zoning ordinance in the year 2000. Calvin Welsh and others in this room. We worked in a very collaborative fashion, for-profit developers, not-for-profit developers, advocates for seniors and children, for bikes, for parks, and we worked on it for almost 2 years. And we worked it out, and when it got to the Board of Supervisors, it had buy-in from all the stakeholders. It passed unanimously at the Board of Supervisors. It has produced thousands and thousands of units of below market rate housing as a result of that ordinance. And we need to get more creative, and we need to be thinking regionally in a very big way, because these are not problems specific to San Francisco. And we need to work with our regional partners to finally, not nibble around the edges, address affordable housing needs.
Hi, my name is Francesca Gallardo. I'm on the executive board of the Latino Young Democrats of San Francisco, and our question is the same for each candidate. So we want to know, how do you plan to preserve and empower the remaining Hispanic, Latinx community of San Francisco, and not just theoretically, but tangible policy initiatives?
So, first of all, we need to be much more respectful and inclusive of community in our planning department and in our planning commission. So that has to do with appointments made by the mayor. And there are ways to make sure that displacement can at least be slowed. I know that cities change. They're living and breathing entities, and we've got to do a much better job. I'm well aware of the 10,000, 12,000 Latino population. Our African-American population has been decimated. We don't want to see that happen to our Latino population either. And then, of course, it's the economy. And we need to do a much better job, especially if we're giving away tax breaks to these very powerful international companies that are making billions in profits and storing their profits offshore because they don't want to pay American taxes, that we get from them community benefits that have teeth and have meaning. And that means potentially a local hiring for different sectors of the economy beyond the building trades. So if you, Uber, are doing business here and you're hiring, then you've got to come to our communities and you've got to train and you've got to hire, because that way it has additional benefits as well. Not only will it benefit the community, I don't mean to use Uber because it's an ugly company, I know, but any company that is in the midst of a lot of hiring, that if we hire locally, we're benefiting the worker because they're going to get a higher salary than they might at a service job. But since they live here already, we don't have to build a new housing unit for them. Because they live here already, we don't have to invest in further expansion of muni capacity. So there are additional benefits to the public good as well. Sure, thank you.
Hi there. Hi, Mark. I'm Brad with the Milk Club. Thanks for being here. So, on the streets, people living with mental illness are far more likely to be victims of violence than to be perpetrators. And particularly when it comes to PTSD, it is often things like violence, homelessness, and other sorts of trauma that lead to homelessness, not the other way around. The majority of people in San Francisco's jail system have mental health support needs, yet there are limited resources to support residents with user-led and evidence-based mental health services in the community. What would you do to prevent mental illness before it occurs, and to champion the needs of people living with mental health concerns who are in ways that would not demand that they are confronted with police officers instead of mental health professionals being cycled through our jail system?
Yes, thank you, Brad. And I touched on this just a little bit earlier, that we should not be cycling and recycling individuals with health concerns through our criminal justice system, and that it has become our county jail the largest provider of mental health services in the county. Just want to back up a little bit. So much goes back to education, which of course also impacts economic opportunity and development. Working with Attorney General at the time, Kamala Harris, we worked on a truancy bill and came to realize that 92%, this was in 2014, 92% of all victims, not perpetrators, victims of homicide in San Francisco under 25 years of age were without a high school diploma. So if we don't succeed in providing a quality public education through at least high school, and now of course we've got Free City as well, that someone is likely to be both a victim or a perpetrator of violent crime. And so all of that can lead to loss of housing and risk of PTSD and other forms of mental and behavioral health issues. So this concept of, and I'm talking to folks who are already providing in a community setting, and we need to scale things so significantly more, community-based services for those with mental health issues, but there's also a concept that I'm looking into about this mental health justice center. So, of course, there are limitations due to civil liberty concerns. If we pick someone up who's acting out, maybe breaking the law and otherwise causing a disturbance on the street, they end up going to county jail with a police officer. We can only hold them for so long if we don't convict them of a crime. We can give them an option of going into this mental health treatment center rather than be in a locked jail cell. And there's a step-down process where they would start in a locked facility, stabilize them, assess them, medicate if necessary, counseling, and through a succession of steps, be able to get them healthy back out of the system. And there's a longer answer to that, but I don't have time right now, sorry.
Thank you. Gabriel with the San Francisco Progressive Alliance. Senator Leno, progressives generally have approved of your work on housing issues in Sacramento. But one issue that has come up and has become very important to many progressive groups, including some people in this room, is the issue of SB 827 that Senator Scott Wiener is proposing right now. A coalition of 37 progressive groups in South Los Angeles just came together to oppose the bill. Do you support or oppose it, and what changes or amendments do you believe are necessary to prevent rampant gentrification and displacement?
So let me say clearly from the start that as it is currently written, I could not and would not support it. And quite honestly, and I'll be having these conversations with Senator Wiener, that I don't believe he's going to be able to move it forward legislatively in its current form either. So I don't, as you mentioned, the city of Los Angeles is up in arms. Our own planning department has written a very serious assessment of it, and there are real concerns of displacement as a result, as well as no requirement for additional affordable housing. And this really gets to the core of my campaign message, which is we need to shake up City Hall. We need a new direction, that if we're going to be upzoning, and keep in mind in many of the area plans like Octavia and Eastern neighborhoods, we've already allowed for greater density. And so this would be on top of that, but what does the community get back? And that's what we need to be negotiating much better, and we need to continue to have some local control. And so I get that there may be other parts of the state that are not building housing much at all. That's not the case in San Francisco. And so I do not support the bill as it's written. And I should also add, in that assessment written by the planning department, about 96% of the city of San Francisco is within a quarter mile or a half mile from either a bus line or a transit corridor, and a single bus running more than as often as 15 minutes would qualify for this upzoning. It's very severe. It's very severe.
Hi.
Hi, Jody.
Hi. Representing San Francisco tomorrow. Happy Valentine's Day. So our question is about how serious you are about reversing climate change. San Francisco has a stated goal of relying on 100% renewable energy by 2030. If you recognize the urgency of this, and given that 92% of our current carbon footprint is evenly split between transportation and buildings, as all kinds of transportation, private, public, whatever, what actions would you direct to meet the goal of 2030 or earlier?
So this is not an issue that has just recently come to my attention. When I was on the County Board of Supervisors, I authored something very novel at the time. There wasn't much of an industry for photovoltaic technology. At that time, we authored and put on the ballot Proposition B in 2000. I think in 2000, it created Vote Solar, a $100 million solar revenue bond. And the idea was to use revenue bonds, which would be paid back, in this case, by the very electricity that would be produced by these solar projects on county rooftops, like schools and hospitals and jails and our airport. We could cover so much of county property with this technology. And the concept was, as the demand for the technology increases exponentially, so does the cost fall equally, ever with greater parity for fossil fuels. And that's how we would wean ourselves from a fossil fuel 20th century to a renewably fueled 21st century. So since then, almost 20 years later, we now have a solar industry that employs more people than oil and gas and is creating thousands and thousands of new jobs in California regularly. What's going on in Washington is not helping, and this new so-called president isn't either. But it is a healthy, strong, and we prove that we can regulate and diminish our greenhouse gas emissions and grow the economy and jobs simultaneously. I am 100% committed to 100% renewable here in San Francisco. I authored the bill that took California from 33% to 50% by 2030, and I also was the champion for community choice aggregation. We would not have community choice aggregation in California if it weren't for my taking on PG&E, who was trying to kill it every step of the way.
I'm John Mark from the San Francisco Green Party.
Hello, John.
Just wanted to ask...
and your phone's green.
Thank you. For now, it's going to turn red in a minute. What do you think of the rise of the gig economy in San Francisco while you were in Sacramento? And what would you do as mayor to regulate or ban the tens of thousands of Lyfts and Ubers that are clogging our streets and the conversion of residential housing into Airbnb hotels?
Well, I have from the start been very critical of what Airbnb has been doing. And in hindsight, all of those radical notion David Campos amendments to the David Hsu legislation now look so commonplace, because though they fought it every step of the way, collecting the transient occupancy tax, regulating and policing their own platforms, since we made it a law in California that hosts must be licensed by the city, that if the platform allowed non-licensed hosts, then they would be accomplice to a crime. And they fought that. And well, of course, they sued us, took us to court. Judge said, get out of here, negotiate with the city. I don't even want to hear about it. And of course, now they're doing it. It's unfortunate that so many of these new industries that call themselves disruptors think that they don't have to play by the same rules and the same laws as everybody else. And as a small business owner for the past 40 years, that's offensive to me, because I've got to play by those rules. So with regard to the gig economy, Mayor de Blasio in New York just recently signed into law, and I would like to see San Francisco do it. And thank you for the question, because it's the first time I get to speak of this publicly. A gig economy worker Bill of Rights. They have no rights right now, no protection for minimum wage. They may not even get paid. And what recourse do they have? In this New York legislation, which is now in place, it gives workers a right to be paid within a certain time frame, and if they are not, a private right of action to go into court. There's a lot we can do to protect these workers. The gig economy is here. We're not going to be able to get rid of it, but we should make sure it's regulated, and we should make sure that workers are protected.
Good evening, Mark. First, I'm going to define a term that's in my question. By the phrase dark money,
yes,
I mean large sums of money, and sometimes very large sums of money, that are passed through various corporations, entities, clubs, and other money laundering devices, so that the source of that money is either hidden or unknown. So that's what I mean by the phrase. And my question to you is...
And I'm well aware of it.
Yes.
Yeah.
What would you do as mayor to eliminate the effect of dark money in San Francisco politics?
Thank you for the question, Counselor. This is an issue that I've been working on for many, many years, and my partner in crime has been none other than Joni Eisen. We worked together on the State Disclose Act for at least 6 years. Clean Money California was the campaign that got the advocates out, and one of the aspects of our effort in Sacramento was the follow the money component, because what we saw, of course, in recent elections was that committee after committee after committee, it was hidden, so you could never actually get to who actually gave the money. And unfortunately, my friends in labor opposed it just as strongly as business did. I never understood why. They said it was going to be too difficult and complex for them to be able to comply. But nonetheless, a milder form of it did finally get passed, and we thank Assemblyman Mullen for that and signing into law. But locally, I have authored the Fair Campaign Pledge for this campaign, and I'm so pleased that Amy and Jane and Angela have all joined me in signing this pledge. And I just wrote a letter to Supervisor Breed asking her yet again to please sign our pledge. And beyond that, given that a super PAC already formed for her benefit has done an attack on me, and she can attack me if she wants. She's got hundreds of thousands, and it's going to be close to more than $1 million. Do it yourself. But we don't even know who put the money into that super PAC. So I was at Supervisor Peskin's press conference yesterday, fully supporting his new legislation, which will require 24-hour reporting for any contribution into a PAC of more than $10,000, and for us to know specifically not only who gave it, but what their business interests are. Because, and this is the crux of it, San Francisco should know who is trying to influence the outcome of our elections and what their interests are. That's what
Hi, Senator Leno. Ben Decker from the San Francisco Burning Crats. Thank you for coming here. You've done a lot that's really impressive and has done a lot for the progressive cause, fighting for single-payer health care, the other reforms you've done to get the dirty money out of politics. But you've also endorsed Willie Brown over Tom Amiano in 1999. You endorsed Gavin Newsom over Matt Gonzalez and Amiano in 2003, and you endorsed Scott Wiener over Jane Kim in 2016. Why didn't you support the progressives at that time, and what do you plan to do to regain our trust?
Sure. I stand accused of others who say that I didn't do anything, Ben, that you just said that I had done. To what matter this is to anybody, I was appointed in 1998 to the Board of Supervisors by Willie Brown, and my friend Tom Amiano challenged me the very next year. You could say you should have just abandoned the guy who appointed you and gave you public office. I did not. I'm not going to go through each one by one, but also there's no mention of the fact that I'm endorsing this year Raphael Mandelman, and I've been an early endorser of his. I'm supporting Matt Haney in District 6. And I supported Hillary Ronan in District 9 last year. I also supported Sandy Lee in her race, Sandy Lee Fuhrer as well. So if we're going to give an accusation, we might as well also give a little credit for where they are. The fact is, and you may like it or you may not, but I prefer to be judged on the work that I do, and the reason I do the work that I do, it comes from a place inside. I have relationships all around the city, and so many of these people either gave me public life or were endorsers of me. And in this political world, oftentimes loyalty means something, and if I were to endorse against everyone who's endorsed me, why would anyone ever endorse me? Again, I don't know that that makes sense, but I endorsed Mark Sanchez when he ran for school board, and I've talked this out with David Campos. David knows that Mark supported me when I challenged the incumbent state senator. I knew Mark, I didn't know David. So it's complex, but I'm here to state that all of the work that I've done in Sacramento is reflective of where I am as a policymaker today. And as mayor of San Francisco, I want to bring major change, fundamental change to the city, because our crises of homelessness, housing affordability, accessibility, and the state of our streets and those suffering on them are out of control. We need major change.
We have time now for a question from the audience, and we had two men who asked the last two questions, so we're really insisting that we have a woman stand up.
Right over here, Ben.
If you could just come, if a woman with a question could please come to the front, the microphone won't reach.
Hello, my name is Maxine. I'm with San Francisco for Democracy, and I live in the city of San Francisco. My politics tend toward progressive, so that's why I'm up here asking the question. There are not many black people left in this city. I mean, I have to walk far and wide to find a few of us. I see some of us here tonight, but what I do know is that our county jails would indicate that there are many black people in the city of San Francisco. And we know that the city police department has a tendency toward a bias, a proven tendency toward bias. So what do you feel you can do as mayor to address the issue of how black people are treated in this city by the police department and killed by the police in the city as mayor?
Maxine, thank you very much for stepping forward. It's good to see you tonight, and thank you for the question. And just to reflect upon one of the major focuses that I really tirelessly engaged in Sacramento was criminal justice reform. I chaired the Public Safety Committee in Sacramento for 6 of my 14 years. And among the many things that I did, decriminalizing marijuana at a time when that was a radical notion, as well as authoring the bill that changed the definition of 6 low-level property crimes and the possession of any drug from a felony to a misdemeanor. We failed horribly. I think we needed 21 votes in the Senate. We had 11. Not many bills failed that badly. But the voters of California were far ahead of their own leaders, because when we put it on the ballot, Prop 47, it passed with 60% of the vote. So thank you, voters of California. And why that's so important, Maxine, and why this addresses your question, is that with a felony on one's record, and we know the disproportionately high number of people of color who are charged and convicted of these felonies, that with a felony on their record, you cannot live with your mother if she is receiving public assistance with her housing. You can never go get higher education because you'll never get a Cal Grant or a Pell Grant. And if you're lucky enough to find employment, it will be minimum wage for the rest of your life. This is what a felony does on your record. Prop 47, as did our legislation, also allows up to 800,000 Californians who have previously been convicted of these felonies, now deemed to be misdemeanor, to be able to change their records and get that felony off and give them a new lease on life. I also authored legislation that would have brought transparency and accountability to law enforcement when they are not only allegedly abusing use of power, but when they have been, those allegations have been sustained after an internal investigation. They are still secret today. Legislation I authored, which unfortunately law enforcement was able to kill, but at least we brought the issue forward and raised its consciousness among Californians. I will continue to make sure someone in Sacramento authors that bill. California has some of the most contained laws with regard to transparency for law enforcement abuse of power. That means either racial profiling or physical or sexual abuse. All of this is kept secret. And I don't do this because I have any dislike or hate for law enforcement, hardly. I want them to be able to do their job. Without them, we don't have civil society. And we want civil society, but without the trust of the communities they serve, they can't do their job. And if it's all in the dark and no one knows who's doing what, there can be no trust. We have to have trust between community and law enforcement. It's that kind of relationship. So I will bring that kind of focus and passion to criminal justice reform as mayor of San Francisco.
Thank you so so much. I think we just have time for your closing statement now.
Okay. You have been very generous and gracious with your time tonight. I thank you for engaging again in this democratic process, and all the variety of clubs that are here representing, and I'm going to tap into Angela's comment for just a minute. We often do find ourselves wrapped into these labels of progressive, non-progressive. They mean a lot to different people and in different ways. We're here fighting for those without a voice, those who are at risk of displacement. I fought for foster youth and for prisoners in solitary confinement, for renters who are at risk of eviction, for those who suffer discrimination in housing, employment, and public services. That is the spirit that I will bring to the office of mayor. It's time for major change in San Francisco. We haven't seen it in many, many decades. And I can tell you that not only the 4 years on the Board of Supervisors, but the 6 in the Assembly and the 8 in the Senate has given me a wealth of experience and opportunity to serve all of you the very best way I can to support progressive values. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Levin. And for the next part of the conversation, unfortunately, Supervisor Breed had a conflict and was not able to be here. What this does mean is we have a little bit of extra time, and so the thought was, if this was okay with everyone, we take a short break, just a few minutes, everyone can stretch their legs, use the restroom, get back here at 7:20. And we thought we'd have the panelists ask a few questions that they would have asked Supervisor Breed if she had been able to make it. She wouldn't be able to answer, but we thought that might be a good use of the time, and then we'll have Amy Farrah White at 7:30. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Be back at 7:20.
Yesterday.
And it's actually is a great opportunity for me to ask everybody for a donation. It cost us about $750, $800 to rent the room, to get the PA system to set everything up.
Sorry, just not a 20-minute break. I've been told I may have said 20-minute break. Be back at 7:20, which is like a 8-minute break. Sorry.
Give me a beer. Give me a beer and a pretzel. Let's make sure. Oh, look, you're in the City Hall now. You're just so nice, you guys. Look at you. I was supposed to be representing Bernie Pretzel. Oh. Social. I don't know. Not the endorsement. Who's our endorsement?
Well, at least you got the nice ass Amazon tripod with the charger.
Yeah, we're on live stream.
What?
I think everyone on live stream.
Oh, is everybody listening to me? How you doing?
You can say hi.
Hello, Facebook.
That's Ian Fregosi, Sanjali Viewers Aid.
Hi, how you doing?
Great. He was a reform delegate to the California Democratic Party. So we're taking a short little break. We will be back in a couple minutes on this. I think I'm going to keep the stream going, though, for continuity's sake. Originally, at this time, President of the Board of Supervisors, London Breed, was supposed to be in attendance for our Q&A. Well, not supposed to. She was tentative up until about yesterday when she told us that she was no longer, that she couldn't change plans that she had already had. So we have a little bit of free time, which is nice that we can then get a little break in the middle of this. Up next will be Amy Farrah White, who was Ed Lee's biggest opponent in the last mayoral election. If you may remember 1, 2, 3 vote out Ed Lee, she ran a grassroots campaign, and as first place for votes, she got 89,000 total votes. She didn't end up winning, obviously, but is now back again running another grassroots campaign focused on progressive values. So we're going to see a little bit on her campaign and go through some questions with her. After that, it's going to be Supervisor Jane Kim. You may remember Supervisor Jane Kim had ran for State Senate in 2016. She won the primary and then faced off against our now Senator Scott Wiener. and she lost that race by a little under 2%, but immediately afterwards fought and won free city college for the city. Some of the other things she's accomplished is $15 minimum wage, Vision Zero being a huge accomplishment of hers. And today she announced a plan to add $1 billion worth of affordable housing as a bond for San Francisco. $1 billion, that's what the B is. I'm not saying million, that's a billion. And yes, that is a lot of money for affordable housing. So we're going to see a little bit more from them. Just give us a few minutes. I hope you're all going potty, getting snacks, whatever you're doing. And I will then flip this back around. Once again, Brandon Rami, social media coordinator to the San Francisco Berniecrats. Very excited to be here at the Progressive Alliance Mayoral Forum.
Sorry, would you like to sign in, please? Oh, is that the Berniecrats? Yeah. Oh. You do so good job. You do such a good job. Wait, you can never
Yeah, I probably can hear it. I'm getting compliments. It's fine. It's great.
Oh, yeah. Hey, man.
Would you like to sign up for the Jade Kim mailing list?
Excuse me, no. I heard she wanted to bring coffee.
All right, I'll see you around.
everybody could please get back to your seats. We are about to begin again. Clap once if you can hear me. Clap twice if you can hear me. All right, thank you everybody. Please retake your seats. We'll be starting in a little bit. The folks can please get in your seats. All right, so we're going to get started. We are pretty strapped on time. Obviously, with this many questions and only 30 minutes per candidate. Folks, you can please take your seats. With only 30 minutes per candidate, we are very low on time, and so what we would like to do, we are trying to push all the candidates here to be the best progressives they can be, and so we would have a chance to ask Supervisor Briggs some questions that many of the other candidates answered. We would like the audience to, if they have any questions they would like us to send to Supervisor Briggs' campaign to ask them for a statement on, if you could please write them down, pass them up, and that will be the plan, is that we send them on to the campaign, so her campaign as well has an opportunity to answer some of the questions we asked here tonight. And then the other thing we have before we start again is Pedro from Fair Vote is going to do a short presentation on ranked choice voting for everyone. Pedro, if you could come up.
Hi everyone, my name is Pedro Hernandez. I'm the Deputy Director of Fair Vote California. We're an electoral reform organization that is part of Fair Vote National, a group that's been around 25 years, effectively leading innovative electoral reforms like the national popular vote, universal registration, lowering the voting age, and ranked choice voting. So I'm here in San Francisco and I'm based here. And I've been going around doing ranked choice voting education because that's the election system we have in San Francisco. We've had it since 2004, thank you. And what it is it gives voters the power to rank candidates. So you don't have to worry about splitting the vote or wasting your votes. And there's no primary or runoff. The election is held at once when representation is usually highest in November, but according to the charter, we have to have an election this June. It fosters greater voter participation. It used to be the case that in runoffs, only 3 in 5 voters return to the poll. In the 24 ranked choice voting elections that have had multiple rounds, 87% of voters have their vote count toward that final round. That's a lot more effective than a runoff. And that means that it was more broadly represented. That election result was actually more broadly representative of the actual electorate. So there's a lot of thoughts out there about people who don't rank, or people don't understand the system. But what we actually see is that in the 2011 mayoral race, close to 85% of voters ranked 2 or more candidates. Yeah. San Francisco's are great rankers. And it works, so I'm going to explain to you how it works. So voters will have a ballot where they can mark a first choice, second choice, and third choice. That could be someone you love, someone you like, and someone you would be okay with. That was my bad joke. The Department of Elections will count everyone's first choice. And if a candidate has 50% plus 1, a majority, they win and the election's over. However, if no candidate has 50% plus 1, the candidate with the least amount of support is eliminated, and those votes go to the voters' second choices. This, and the Department of Elections will count again, and if a majority is reached, they win. Whoever ends up getting the majority. But if no one has a majority, you repeat the process over until someone has a majority of votes. Some key points I want to remind folks is that everyone has 1 vote in a ranked choice voting election. Ranking your favorite more than once won't help you because your vote will only count for that one candidate. Only ranking, a first ranking for a candidate, that's also known as a bullet vote, doesn't help your favorite candidate because your second and third choices will only count if your first choice is eliminated. So ranking a second and third doesn't hurt your first choice candidate. So there are a lot of people here who are part of organizations. We're a resource here in San Francisco. My email is pedro@fairvote.org. There's literature and business cards here, and I can present to your group. There are ways to do dual endorsements and ranked choice voting endorsements and all these variations. I'm happy to talk to your groups and educate your folks about it. Thank you.
And Pedro, just one last thing. We've got a lot of folks here representing a variety of different groups, and a lot of clubs, like my club, for instance, are going to have ranked endorsements for our mayoral votes. We're going to have first, second, and third place. How do you suggest that the clubs go about educating voters, basically, about how this ranking works? And just explaining to them, why they have a first choice, why they have a second choice, and so on. Can you explain that at all, or can you help to?
Yeah, so there's several issues you brought up with that question. So one, making sure that you're, explaining ranked choice voting to your club is important, so I recommend doing that. The Department of Elections has great resources. We're a resource as well. We can come and speak to your group. As you're developing your endorsements, it'll be, if you choose to have a ranked endorsement, making it explicit, or if you choose not to have an order to it, making sure that whatever message you're trying to convey, whether it's, rank in the, in any order you want, you got to make that explicit. So we have a lot of examples and sample literature that folks can use and take ideas from as well. So we also have a database of a lot of information. And we also study the elections pretty thoroughly if people have questions.
Thank you, Pedro. Real quickly, Carolina had to run out, so I want to introduce Kevin Ortiz will be helping me, Ortiz, the VP with Latino Democratic Club. Thank you, Kevin. And so we're going to be splitting the running around on this one. Amy Fairweiss is our next candidate. Please come up, Amy. And once again, there will be 3 minutes for kind of introductions, then 2 minutes for each question and answer. And the way we've been doing it, because we have so many clubs, it's actually 2 minutes for the question, including the answer, so it's actually slightly less than 2 minutes, sort of a lightning round. And then time for audience, and then for the closing. So with that, Amy, thank you so much, and please go.
Happy Valentine's Day, San Francisco Progressives. So I'm losing my voice, but I definitely did find my heart in San Francisco and grew roots here in this city. And I'm feeling, after listening to the other candidates tonight, that truly the future is looking brighter for our city. Are you feeling that? Yeah, I'm excited about that. And I'm proud to be running as a Democratic Socialist with a hat tip to Bernie Sanders. And it sounds like we do have some more Democratic Socialists that are still in the closet that are running for mayor right now. And hopefully they will boldly come out. Because it is entirely possible to have a healthy economy while serving the essential needs and well-being of every resident in San Francisco. Do you feel that? So a little bit about me. I was actually born in Berkeley, raised in San Jose by two parents who were union members, and they were a nurse and an appliance salesman, and they were able to buy a house in San Jose for $77,000 in 1977. And then I was the first generation of my family to go to college, and I went to De Anza Community College. I learned critical thinking, and then over the next 20 years, I've worked in a variety of fields. I worked at Planned Parenthood, Boys and Girls Club, and different internships, doing media literacy and outreach and education. I've done girls leadership and development programming. I've done work in mental health. I've lived in intentional healing communities. I've worked on organic farms. I've done neighborhood organizing, community organizing. So I don't necessarily see myself as a politician. That doesn't resonate with me, that terminology. I see myself as a developer and a practitioner of code to support individual, community, and organizational well-being. And I got active in local politics. Many of you have heard this story when it was after I graduated with a master's degree in organizational development from SF State. And I had stayed on to do the work to develop a new community service learning project there, where from scratch, I saw the need to connect graduate students in the MPA program with real live community benefit organizations and nonprofits to support them with strategic management and evaluation and programming. So I did that work for a year afterwards. And then this one day, it was after the global financial collapse and everybody was talking about these economic times and jobs, jobs, jobs. And I saw this direction that we were going with the Twitter tax break, and I was raising an eyebrow. But then it was the Chase Bank that was allowed to come into my Divisadero neighborhood and displace 3 local storefronts, collapse them into one when we didn't need it. And this was done, I learned from working with my neighbors, Gus Hernandez and Dean Preston and Quentin Mackey. We all worked together and they taught me the zoning code. And I learned that we actually can learn the zoning code and create a strategic yes for the solutions and to address the issues that are facing our time. And I've been hooked ever since 2011. I've been creating those solutions, and I'm happy to share them with you tonight.
Hi, Amy. Thank you so much for joining us. As you know, we've been fighting for a long time to get a public bank here in San Francisco that's going to use our money to build affordable housing in our city. It's been held up in the Board of Supervisors for too long. What are you going to do as mayor to actually get it out of the Board of Supervisors and get a real public bank for the people of San Francisco?
Well, Matt Gonzalez introduced this back in 2001? And then I joined John Avalos' campaign for mayor back in 2011 to support a public bank. And I was very, very big advocate for that. And then, now I'm actually part of a coalition of people that are working to, support a public bank, and just went to a hearing recently, a couple weeks ago, around this. And there's a task force that's been created to create recommendations. And right now, the issue is there are different mechanisms for this. Do we create a public bank with a new charter? Do we work with a credit union charter? There's different options for how we move forward, but I very much look forward to being part of those discussions and learning from what the task force recommends. And you can believe me, if I am your next mayor, we will have a public bank in San Francisco.
Sorry about that. I'm Stephen Jaffe. I'm the president of the South Beach District 6 Democratic Club. Hi, Amy. Dark money is money that is funneled through various corporations, partnerships, entities, and clubs in order to hide its source of origin. As mayor, what would you do to rid San Francisco politics of the influence and presence of dark money?
Let's shine a light on it. I'm very excited about what Mark Leno has put forward with this FAIR campaign pledge. Definitely signed it right off the bat. And it's important for us to know who is funding these attack ads. And beyond that, though, let's go ahead and say what's necessary for us to have a fair election in San Francisco. Thus far, there has only been one media article. It was an Examiner article on December 20th that was asking all the candidates what they thought about an issue, and it happened to be tasers. Since then, all the reporting from media has been on polling data, the interim mayor drama, and also fundraising. There's been more information about fundraising than policy. And so I implore all of you to ask a media outlet tonight. Go home and email KQED, email SF Weekly, and the Examiner, and the Chronicle, and say, can you please do side-by-side comparisons about the issues for candidates? Because currently that is not happening. And how can we do what Thomas Jefferson wanted and what Abraham Lincoln wanted in having an informed populace to have a democracy unless we actually have the media working with us? So that is something that I really want all of you to do. We don't need fundraising information. We need actual policy over politics.
Hi, I'm John Mark Shandonia from the SF Green Party. I had a question about your job at the Community Land Trust, the SF Community Land Trust. Can you tell us more about how you got the job after running against Mayor Lee? That's a little unusual for him to hire an opponent. And how do you think Community Land Trust can help solve the affordability and gentrification crisis in the city?
Great question. So I was actually asked by a couple of the board members of the Community Land Trust to join as a board member, which I did, and I was voted onto the board in March of 2016. And then there was a transition of leadership there from Tracy Parent, who was amazing and helped set up the Small Sites program in San Francisco that is growing to this day. And Tracy actually contacted me and asked me if I would fill in for this operations manager position that they had there. So I had been working, I started a nonprofit called the St. Francis Homelessness Challenge, but I still continued that work, but took on the work as operations manager for the Land Trust. And one of the things that I would really like to see in San Francisco that the Land Trust has supported is right of first refusal. Are you with me on this one? David Chu actually introduced this years ago, but that means that when a property goes on the market, they do this in Washington, D.C., you as the tenant and nonprofits have the ability to have the first right to purchase the property, which helps prevent Ellis Act evictions. And the Small Sites program is something that has expanded from the Land Trust to also be utilized by Meta and Chinatown CDC in order to be able to purchase properties and prevent longtime tenants from being displaced.
Hi. Is this on? Yeah. Okay, our question, San Francisco Tomorrow's question is about how serious you are about reversing climate change in the city. San Francisco has the goal of relying on 100% renewables by 2030. Given that 92% of the current carbon footprint is evenly split between transportation and buildings, what actions would you direct as mayor to meet the goal?
So Gavin Newsom actually made the bold goal of 100% renewable by 2020. And one of the reasons that I ran for mayor against Ed Lee in 2015 was that Ed Lee was blocking the implementation of clean power. Do you remember that? With his commissioners, he wasn't setting the rates. And so that was one of the key issues that I had. I signed the Climate Mobilization Pledge that people now in Los Angeles, Naomi Klein is a big supporter of this, and also in New York, they're signing this pledge. There's a draft implementation plan that the Climate Mobilization has put together for a bold plan for 100% renewable by 2025. So I would love to be able to be part of those discussions with subject matter experts to look at that plan and see what's possible. Another thing I've been a big supporter of is Soil Not Oil. And we really need to learn. One of my favorite books is The Soil Will Save Us by Kristen Olson. And every child in San Francisco Unified School District should be learning about carbon drawdown by being good stewards of the soil. Also, I wanted to run against Ed Lee in 2015 because he appointed people to SFers, retirement, pension, that wouldn't divest from our fossil fuels. And so it was so imperative for someone to stand up. And that's why Francisco Herrera and Stuart Shuffman and I worked together back in 2015 with the Vote 123 to replace Ed Lee, because that was not the right direction for our city.
Hi, Amy. Gabriel with San Francisco Progressive Alliance. Our question relates to, you mentioned the unfairness of the political system, where much of the conversation revolves around money being gathered and other institutional support, but it is the system we live in. And so the question we would like to ask is, what accomplishments can you point to in your record that you took point on that demonstrate that you are qualified for mayor and should be treated as a serious candidate in these debates that are going on right now?
Thanks. So I've been a leader outside of City Hall since 2011, like I said, when I worked with my neighbors to push back against the breaking of formula retail law with the Chase Bank. I worked with Eric Marr on a group to strengthen formula retail law, and we actually made it so that banks are now included, so that we have the ability to push back as a community when a big bank moves into our neighborhood. Also, one of the things I started promoting back in 2011 was right of first refusal legislation. I was very active in that. I was also promoting, because of the empty storefront issue, a new program to let's figure out not necessarily vacancy tax, because that's hard to regulate at the local level, but we need to be able to regulate it through impact fees, because currently it's only $700 a year if you keep your property, your storefront vacant. And so we need to increase that impact fee. And I've actually developed the framework for a program where we can do short to mid-term leases, working with the property owners to have businesses come in. I've done work when I was at the San Francisco Community Land Trust. I worked with all these cooperatives there with group housing to create a new system that the Mayor's Office of Housing is now implementing, so that it's a hybrid between a program that does a lottery system and then also has some kind of choice that the people get to exhibit that are living in those houses to choose the people that are coming in that support participatory self-management. And I've actually developed a program from scratch to support transitional villages, to transition 1,000 people out of encampments into community integrated transitional villages on their pathway up. So I'm a program developer. I know how to do this work. It's the same type of thing as developing legislation, maybe even a little bit more complex. And so I have the ability to do that work and also facilitate large groups of people.
Thank you for being here, Amy. I'm Kevin Ortiz with the Latino Democratic Club, and our question is actually very specific to a vacancy tax. Right now, currently, the housing crisis that we're facing, people of color are disproportionately affected the most as victims of displacement and gentrification. Over 10,000 Latinos have been displaced from this neighborhood, and the number is only growing. 70% of our homeless have been evicted, yet as a people, we have more empty units than people. So as a mayor, are you willing to implement a monthly vacancy tax that will fund affordable housing projects on all units that have been vacant for 9 months or more to pressure landlords to not hold empty units? If so, what will you do to enforce this? If not, why?
So, like I was saying before, I've been having conversations with Ben and lots of people about what is actually within the purview at the local level to enforce the vacancy tax. And it seems that there are some challenges with that because there are state level regulations that we have to shift. But we can work with this idea of an impact fee, because we know that there's an economic impact when people are keeping their units or their storefronts vacant. So I will push that to the extent of the law locally, and then push for statewide legislation reform to be able to do that. Another thing, I was at Sacramento to support the repeal of Costa-Hawkins to expand rent control throughout the city, and I actually ended up talking to dozens of small property owners. There's 500 of them there from San Francisco, and I realized we need to build bridges. At the Community Land Trust, I was a small property owner. We own 13 small properties, and the idea is that a lot of people are keeping their units empty because they're afraid or of language barriers, and so there's a way that the city can support small property owners in activating those units and help them to understand that we're on their side too.
Hi, Amy. I'm Brad. Thanks for answering our questions. I'm with the Mill Club. So this is similar to something we asked before. So on the streets, people living with mental illness are far more likely to be victims of violence than to be perpetrators of violence. Experiences of abuse, violence, homelessness, and other sorts of trauma often lead to mental health struggles and homelessness, not the other way around. That said, the majority of people in the San Francisco jail system have mental health support needs, yet there are limited resources to support residents with user-led and evidence-based mental health services in community. What would you do to prevent mental health illness before it occurs? How will you champion needs of those with mental health needs who are receiving health and mental health resources that they need? How will you help them receive those services rather than cycling through an overly punitive, often ineffective criminal justice system?
So I have a background working in transitional housing and mental health and intentional healing communities. And the last 2 years I've actually been doing the on-the-ground work with encampment residents. So I know hundreds of encampment residents in San Francisco. And I have to correct something that Angela Alioto said. She said after 90 days, you start to have mental health issues being on the street. Day one, if you don't have a safe place to belong, you start to develop heightened cortisol response to your situation. If you don't feel like you can have secure sleep and get enough sleep, that's affecting you. And so that's why it's so important for us to create these community integrated transitional villages. I've been passing out brochures to many of you, and the idea is that we need to support people being in community, participating, not just being recipients, in community, in these structured community integrated villages where you can be in the least restrictive, most autonomous setting possible. And I worked with Progress Foundation when I was at SF State, and they do transitional housing support and emergency services for people who are experiencing homelessness and mental health issues. And their model is an individual person first approach. And that's really the only way this works, is if we work with each person as an individual and figure out what kind of support that they need.
Hi, I'm Francesca Gallardo with the Latino Democrats of San Francisco. And our question is, how do you plan to preserve and empower the remaining Hispanic Latinx community of San Francisco, and not just theoretically, but tangible policy initiatives?
I'm a big supporter of Meta and the work that they're doing, and like I said, Meta started working with the Small Sites program from the Mayor's Office of Housing to be able to acquire small sites when people are being displaced. I think that's really important. I think it's really important for us to activate these empty storefronts and be able to work with Calle 24 and United to Save the Mission in order to be able to activate these storefronts with the organizations, the arts and cultural organizations, and the entrepreneurs that are coming out of Meta in that particular community. In the Castro, we should be working with the CBD in the Castro as well as the LGBT community, so we can really support the different types of cultural organizations that exist. I'm a big fan of Calle 24 and Eric Arguello and the work to be able to establish that cultural district. So I think it's a matter of how do we activate the streets in a way that supports more eyes on the streets as well, in a very creative way. Let's bring back the arts and culture to San Francisco. Let's bring back, crisis de-escalation and activation of the streets. I was on Valencia about 2 weeks ago, and there was a group of people that rode by on old-fashioned roller skates. And I know that sounds like something trivial, but in a way, it just lit up everybody's face that was on the sidewalk. And to do things like that, to have Mission Street be a place for a promenade, or to have more of these cultural events, I think is a really important direction we need to go.
Hi, Amy. My name is Art Persico. I'm with the Progressive Democrats of America San Francisco chapter. And my question is the same, but I think you've already addressed homelessness quite a bit in your previous answers. So I'd like you to focus in on how can we create affordable housing for San Francisco in general? What steps would you take as mayor?
So this speaks to Gabriel's earlier question of why I should be mayor. So back in 2015, I developed the framework for a program for ADUs, which are additional dwelling units. So the city did a survey of all the parcels of San Francisco and found that 37,000 units could add one or more additional dwelling units within their building envelope. And so the idea is that we could go to property owners who have this ability, and we should start with marginalized communities first and small property owners, and say, if you sign here, we will finance and do the construction and building for an additional dwelling unit if you rent to a family in San Francisco or a worker in San Francisco at 30% of their income. So that's one idea that I have for doing that. The other is, like I said before, we have thousands and thousands of units that were taken off the market illegally by Airbnb, and we have thousands of units that are just sitting there unoccupied. Everybody's talking about, are you gonna build 5,000 units a year as mayor? Well, guess what? There are already 45,000 entitled projects in San Francisco already, so we need a mayor who's gonna be able to do the work organizationally to streamline the permitting process. And so it's not really an issue of whether or not you can do 5,000 units a year, because we already have those lined up, and it's about how we streamline that process. But it's about activating those empty units like you were talking about and building units that are specifically for affordable housing. I said at the United Democratic Club Forum that it's so important for us to create a new mechanism for financing affordable housing, and any upzoned project or increased density project in San Francisco should have 50% affordable, stratified from 15% to 120%, and I will definitely push for that as your next mayor.
So someone who is not a white male could ask a question of Amy, because it has been a little skewed so far. We'd like to correct that.
Great, thank you. I'm Sue, and according to the 2009 Peak Oil Preparedness Task Force, Muni, BART, and Caltrain accounted for less than 2% of all of San Francisco's total energy usage. So I don't think it's gone up that much since then, less than 2%. Considering the urgency of our need to reduce our carbon footprint, what do you think you could do as mayor to encourage mode shift from private cars, including Uber and Lyft, to mass transit, and what could you do to help expand that mass transit?
Sure. So I was actually just I met with some taxi drivers yesterday to go over some policy initiatives that we can put forward. And one of the things we were talking about is that Dianne Feinstein is supporting the idea of an additional Bay Bridge. But Dianne, help us out here. What we need is to be able to regulate the TNCs, because if we have tens of thousands of Uber and Lyft drivers coming into San Francisco, they're clogging up our bridges and they're causing a lot of pollution. So that's something that we definitely need to be doing. Being able to build near transit is something that we need to do, and nobody asked me specifically about SB 827, but I agree that it's overreaching right now and it needs a lot of reform before it would ever be something that we could consider. But if we do that, we need to increase the affordability that's there as well. I think that, one of the things that's interesting is that in new affordable housing developments, 10 years ago, they would do a 1-to-1 car-to-unit parity, and now they're not doing that. There's a new development just a block away from one of these affordable developing units that had 150 units and 150 parking spaces, and now there's 100 units with no parking. And so I know it's going to be a little challenging, though, for that neighborhood. Let's be real about it. And so the thing I think that we need to do is create a new kind of shared transit network in San Francisco. So when we have new development, we should have a shared fleet People shouldn't be allowed to have private ownership of cars, or it should be quite a fee in order to do so. And then the community can be using a shared fleet that's within the development itself. It's a brand new idea, something that I think we should be doing.
Time for one more audience question. Kevin?
I actually don't mind listening to white people talk. I live in San Francisco. So rah white men. If you had been on the board what was it, January, would you have voted for Mark Farrell to become mayor?
Oh my God.
Yes or no? I know you want to focus on issues, and I really appreciate that.
Well, that is an issue. That is an issue, and I take
How would you have voted?
I take issue with that. And so I actually spoke at the Board of Supervisors public comment, and I said, listen, we have an opportunity to do something different here. We have the opportunity to have collaborative leadership. And so whoever that you choose to be in this position, make sure that they say that the board as a whole will be able to be in charge of new appointments to commissions, right? So we should have the 11 people on the board that are making those decisions. We should have the 11 people on the board making decisions about the budgeting process. And so we had an opportunity to get an agreement, and that's what the Board of Supervisors does. They create legislation and contracts. And so they should have been able to they should have been able to come up with something new and collaborative. And that was all backdoor dealing. They didn't open that up to the public and ask why didn't they do even one survey to ask people, who is it that you would want to serve in this interim capacity? And it would have been a great idea, I think, to be able to appoint someone such as Naomi Kelly, who's the right-hand person to Ed Lee anyway, as the city administrator. We could have used, not had this drama that is now hanging over our heads. And Mark Farrell, oh my goodness, that just doesn't make any sense to me that he would be our representative right now. Although I do want to work with Mark, and I want to work with him on addressing the encampment crisis, because we do not have to wait till June 6th for all of us to work together to address that. Sure. So I know very well that I am one of the underdogs in this race, but it's important for me to be in this race because I am bringing up the policy issues. I am talking about how is it that we create actionable initiatives and legislation that we can enact on June 6, 2018. I'm going to grab this. This is something that I put together, and it's something that I'm going to be putting together online as well through a participatory platform. It's called an outcomes tracker for the mayor, the next mayor who is appointed. It's about 20 different things that we can actually track the outcomes of what people are saying they want to do and the things that we want the mayor to do. And we can follow that from June 6, 2018 to June 2019, because guess what? In 2019 as well. So it's so important for us to do this. I want to be able to talk about policy differences over the next few months. And so one of the things I'm going to ask you to consider is donating to my campaign so I can actually achieve public financing. And I think you'll be pleasantly surprised if you look at my website, which is weissformayor.com, what I want to do with that money. If we raise $50,000, we will get $100,000 that we can use in a variety of ways, and I want to use a participatory budgeting process in order to put that into play. So please think about this idea, and then also vote 1, 2, 3 for equity. Make sure that we're doing a ranked choice voting slate so that we don't get stuck with a non-progressive, and we can be excited about the future of equity for San Francisco. Thank you.
Thank you all for being here. So we're going to introduce our final candidate of the night. And so that is the one and only Jane Kim. Yep, so the format is going to be, the candidate is going to get a 3 minutes introduction, and then after that, each club is going to ask 2-minute questions, which you will have a 2-minute response to. And then at the end, you will have a 1-minute closing statement. Yes, 1-minute closing statement.
So good evening, everyone. Thank you all so much for staying for the last speaker. I appreciate you all spending a very long evening. And also, it's really been overwhelming, just the immense number of people that have been coming out to all of our forums, because it just goes to show how important this upcoming election is. It's been 15 years since the city has seen a truly open election for the mayor's race. And in the last 15 years, we've seen 400,000 San Franciscans leave the city. Leave either because of the skyrocketing rents, leave to other cities and other regions, or end up unsheltered in cars and on our streets. But over this time, we've also seen our economy grow tremendously. We've seen our economy grow. You've seen more businesses come to San Francisco at that same time. But I think what is most striking about what's happened in the last 15 years, which really has been a trend throughout this country, is the fastest growing income gap between the rich and the poor in our city. And this is according to the Brookings Institute. And over the last 30 years, we have seen our middle class shrink in San Francisco. If you lived in San Francisco in 1990, the middle class made up 45% of our population. As of 2012, it went down to 34%, and I bet over the last 5 years it has dropped even more precipitously since that time. I've had the honor of serving the city over the last decade, starting out on the Board of Education and now serving on the Board of Supervisors representing the South of Market, Mission Bay, Tenderloin, and Treasure Island. And I represent the poorest residents of San Francisco, and as of recently, I represent the wealthiest zip code in San Francisco as well. Almost every single tech company that you've heard of resides in our district, and almost every single adult homeless shelter is also in the district that I represent. And so over the last 7 years, I have really gotten a chance to work on many of these citywide issues, and I believe so strongly in local government. And I believe that it should be an institution that invests in our citizens again. What we have seen over the last 40 years at the federal level and the state level is a continued divestment in the very things that helped America grow its middle class. We divested from the business of building housing for our working class, poor, and middle class communities. Well, I don't know if we should applaud that. And through Proposition 13, we divested from funding public education in K through 12 and our higher education universities. I think that's probably more appropriate. In the last 40 years, California built 22 state prisons and only built 1 UC and 3 CSUs. And so we've decided the institutions that we invest in, these are our dollars, taxpayer dollars, that young Californians are going to end up into the future. And I run for office because I want to fight back against the trend that we're seeing. We are not just a liberal city, we are also a wealthy city, which means that we can afford to enact dream policies that other municipalities can't even fantasize about, which is why last year I worked with all of you to pass Proposition W to make San Francisco the only city in the nation to make community college free again. And we did this because we know that community college, as our only lifelong learning institution, is so important to all of us here in San Francisco. In fact, the average San Francisco resident with an associate's degree makes on average $11,000 more than the same individual with just a high school diploma. I'm also, is it time? Okay, can I just finish? I'm also proud to have won record levels of affordable housing. In fact, over the last 7 years, I've won more affordable and middle-income housing than any city legislator. And I've shown that we can negotiate hard with market-rate developers and win so that we're building housing that we can afford to live in as well. Thank you very much.
Hi
Hi, Jane. My name's Art Persico. I'm with the Progressive Democrats for America San Francisco chapter. And my question is the same as the other candidates got. In the context of great income inequality in San Francisco, what proposals do you have that could address the issue of homelessness specifically, as well as creating affordable housing for the larger population?
So what I talked about was how important it is for us to reinvest in our citizens again. We know that homelessness developed as a national urban phenomenon when the federal government decided to start divesting from HUD. And they divested over 50% of our budget. In fact, through the 1970s, we used to spend more money on housing than we did on our defense budget. And so San Francisco is working to fight back against that. One is, of course, making sure that if you are building in San Francisco and profiting off the city that we all made great together, then you need to build for us. So raising inclusionary levels, raising the fees on our developers who are profiting from the value that we confer on their land is one piece. Second, we need to invest more public dollars into affordable and middle-income housing. I'm proposing that we put forward a $1 billion general obligation bond to go before the voters this year in November and pass something that is going to make an immense difference in building more affordable housing, but also acquiring rent-controlled housing and making them permanently affordable for our middle-class families. Third, we have to treat homelessness not just as an economic issue, and that is largely how the city has treated homelessness over the last 10 years. I actually spent a night in one of our single adult shelters because I wanted to see what that experience was like for many of our residents who live on our streets, and it is an incredibly frustrating process. You wait on line after line after line, and I finally got a bed at Next Door Shelter in the district that I represent, and I spent 14 hours in the shelter, and it is so different from a site visit. And what I saw there was that people are far older and far sicker than I had realized. And they come in and they meet our minimum wage staff members who just don't even have the resources or training to address the population that's coming. And so they are also sick. They're also angry and frustrated too. After that experience, I worked with Barbara Garcia, the head of Department of Public Health, and I fought to get full-time nurses in every single adult shelter in my district. And we saw over 70% decline in 911 calls from our shelters because our nurses were actually able to serve the residents that were coming in. Then in 2015, the mayor, thank you, we love our nurses, granted our office $6.6 million to build out a 24-hour medical respite shelter, which we just opened last year in December, which is a homeless shelter staffed by nurses, clinicians, and psychologists for the sickest people on our streets.
I'm Francesca Gairo. Francesca. Hi. So I'm on the executive board of the Latino Young Democrats of San Francisco. And our question for you is, how do you plan to preserve and empower the remaining Hispanic Latinx community of San Francisco, not just theoretically, but tangible policy initiatives?
So I have been working with many of our different community groups, one on a cultural social district approach. We have several in my district, along with Calle 24, that Supervisor David Campos and Hillary Ronan are leading on. We are also leading on Compton's Transgender Cultural District, which is the first transgender district in the nation. Along with Soma Filipinas, recognizing the long contributions of Filipino-American community in South Market, and the Leather LGBTQ district in Western Soma as well. But we don't just want this to be a historic district with street names and placards. We want to make this a living community, which means that we invest in building affordable housing, that we invest in small businesses that represent these communities, that create jobs and bring wealth into our neighborhoods and attract tourism, and that we invest in these culturally appropriate services for our communities so that they can afford to live and thrive and play in our city. Next, I should say that we want to make sure that we are funding adequate services, whether it's legal services, housing counseling, that are culturally appropriate in all of our different neighborhoods so that people have a fighting chance to stay here. But ultimately, we have to build and produce more affordable middle-income housing for people to live here. It's great, and I'm so proud that San Francisco is a sanctuary city, but it doesn't matter if you can't afford to live here. We have amazingly progressive policies. If you can't afford to live in San Francisco, you're not going to be protected by our services, our policies, and our positions.
Jane. I'm Brad. I'm on the executive board of the Harvey Milk Democratic Club. So our organization is founded on basically the backs of queer folks who were suffering and making their ways out of violence. And so we have a sort of deep connection to that. And our question is, experiences of abuse, violence, homelessness, and other sorts of trauma often lead to mental illness and homelessness, not the other way around. That said, the majority of people in the San Francisco jail system have mental health support needs and are faced with inadequate evidence-based mental health services and community. What are a few concrete examples of ways in which you will focus and address social illnesses that lead to suffering in order to prevent suffering and mental illness before and after they occur on an individual level?
So I think one of the tragic things in our society today is that prisons have actually become our solution to poverty, homelessness, substance abuse, and mental health issues. And I understand why. It's an easy solution. If I came up here, I could commit today that I could build another jail as mayor of San Francisco. That is an easy commitment that I can make to you to help address these issues. But we know that jail is truly not the answer to what we're seeing here on our streets. We have to more greatly invest in mental health services. So whether that means the 24/7 medical respite shelter that I talked about that we just opened recently in the South of Market, opening up more psychiatric beds at General Hospital, and also asking all of our private hospitals that do incredibly well to invest their profits back into their community and back into their patients, because many of our private hospitals have gone out of the business of providing psychiatric support, not just to our most vulnerable, but to middle and upper income residents as well. We need to use our leverage at every single level to ask the private sector and the public sector to partner in more adequately providing behavioral and mental health services. And finally, I have to come back to it. We have to house people, which means we need to build more housing and we need to protect the housing that we have here in San Francisco so people can continue to live here and not end up on our streets, where, as you mentioned, Brad, the trauma of being on our streets does actually cause a lot of mental health and also substance abuse issues on our streets.
So 70%, so I'm Kevin with the Latino Democratic Club. Thank you for being here. So 70% of our homeless have been evicted, yet as a city we have more empty units than people. As mayor, will you commit to implement a monthly vacancy tax that will fund affordable housing projects on all units that have been vacant for 9 months or more to pressure landlords to not hold empty units? And if so, how will you work to enforce this?
The enforcement question is very tricky. So I do support a vacancy tax, and I also have, our office, along with then Supervisor Eric Marr, was also looking at a second home tax as well, so that we can tax units that aren't someone's first homes here in San Francisco. And so all of those are concepts that I support. The enforcement issue is really a question of resources. It's great to write a lot of great laws, but they don't matter if you don't actually enforce them. And so we have largely, what we have here is a complaint-driven system where you have to let us know that there's a vacant unit for us to enforce that work. We have to more greatly invest in enforcement units in the planning department, Department of Building Inspection, to make sure that if we pass something like this, that we can move it forward. But finally, there are cities in this country that have a rental registry. And that allows us to have a universe of understanding of what units are out on the rental market. And it's something that our office has been looking at as a way of getting a sense of the inventory here in San Francisco and what is vacant and what is not. So if you have an empty unit or a rental unit on the market, you have to register it with the city so that we can get a sense of all of that data.
Hi, Jane. Thank you for being here tonight. I asked this question of Senator Leno as well, and this relates to State Senator Scott Wiener's proposed SB 827. Now, there have been a lot of opposition to this bill, including recently 37 progressive organizations in Los Angeles came out against it, saying it would promote heavy displacement. Will you take a stance opposing SB 827, and what amendments do you think would be necessary before you could support it?
So I do oppose SB 827 as it's currently written, and actually it was my Korean American brother from the LA City Council, David Ryu, that introduced that resolution. And Supervisor Aaron Peskin has just introduced a similar resolution at the Board of Supervisors last Tuesday, which we will be voting on in 2 weeks at the full Board of Supervisors. I actually support the premise of 827. I do think that transit corridors are where we can have greater density, and we need it. We need to build more housing, and we should be upzoning in areas where there's infrastructure to support it. But what I don't like is this one-size-fits-all ordinance, law, state bill for the entire country. Something like that works great in the district that I represent. But we have to make sure that we are thoughtful about all the neighborhoods that we're going into. But more importantly than that, if we are going to raise the height and density on privately owned land, which is what this bill does, so that means we are conferring value and wealth to those that own that land, then we absolutely have to ask those that own this land to share that value back with all of us. So there needs to be a mandate on more affordable and middle-income housing before I can support this bill. A, and B, there has to be anti-displacement controls to make sure that we're not demolishing existing housing and pushing out existing residents so that we can build bigger, newer, and frankly, luxury housing in their stead.
Hi, Jane. I'm representing San Francisco tomorrow, and we've been asking the candidates, how serious are you about reversing climate change, which affects all of us? The city has a stated goal of relying on 100% renewable energy by 2030, and given that 92% of our current carbon footprint is evenly divided between cars and buses and trucks and buildings, transportation and buildings, what actions would you direct as mayor to meet the goal of 2030 or earlier, 100% renewable?
So I absolutely support 100% renewable, and I think that there's a number of ways that we can do. One, I support Clean Power SF and our Community Choice Aggregation Program, and I highly encourage all of our residents to opt in to clean energy and public power here in San Francisco. Second, we need to invest more greatly in, again, housing and affordable housing so people can afford to live where they work and go to school, and we need to more greatly invest in transit. Now, I support all of the long-term proposals that will greatly increase regional transportation here in the Bay Area, whether it's the second Transbay Tube, all the way to the downtown extension of Caltrain, and of course, high-speed rail. But we know that those projects are decades in the making. In the meantime, we absolutely must be pushing and investing in more affordable near-term improvements. This means more protected bike lanes. This means more ferry and water taxis and more buses. This is something that we know that we can get on the ground immediately to get more people out of their cars and into their bikes and into buses and into ferries so that we can do more of that work. I'm a strong proponent of congestion pricing. I really believe in it. We've seen it work in cities throughout Europe, not just bring in more dollars for public transit, but also to have to decrease congestion and get less cars on the road. It really isn't about the fee. It is about London and other cities in Europe reaching their sustainability goals as well.
Hi Jane, I'm John Mark from the SF Green Party. I wanted to ask you about your support for a number of initiatives that we see as increasing the privatization of city parks. In 2016, Prop B cut the Board of Supervisors' oversight of the Rec and Park budget at a time when Rec and Park managers seem to view the parks more as a corporate venue than as a public resource. You also supported non-resident fees at the Botanical Gardens, as well as closing the parks at midnight. As mayor, what will you do to ensure that non-wealthy San Franciscans get the full benefit of our public spaces?
I did not support that last measure of closing parks at midnight. I voted against it. Our public parks are public, and I did not support the park closure hours. In fact, many of our residents fight to have our parks open even later so they can walk their dogs and others. And in fact, one of the questions that I asked Rec and Park during that debate was if we saw a jogger at 4 in the morning in our parks, if we would cite them. And the response was, of course we wouldn't. even though the parks are closed to the public, but we would know who really to cite. And to me, that legislation was the epitome of classism here in San Francisco. So the two other measures was actually increasing a set-aside revenue stream for our Rec and Park department, a department that frankly needs more public funding and less privatization, in fact. And one of the reasons why I voted for it, along with 10 other members of the Board of Supervisors and Supervisor John Avalos, who is one of the co-authors of that measure, was because we wanted to see Rec and Park put in place a strong equity metrics in how it invested these new dollars, using race and income and neighborhood to disperse this new additional funding. And also because we really strongly believe that there should be more public dollars for Rec and Park so they don't have to depend on privatization for our parks to survive. The fee on the Botanical Garden, that was a very, very tough one for me. I voted against it the first time. I voted for it the second time. It is a fee on non-residents in San Francisco to access botanical gardens. We already set a precedent by allowing that in the Japanese tea garden. And at the time, during the budget deficit, we had to make some tough choices. And I voted to make sure that this continues to be free for our residents, but that we do have a minor fee for non-residents.
Hi, I'm Stephen Jaffe. I'm the president of the South Beach District 6 Democratic Club. Jane is our wonderful District 6 supervisor.
Thank you, Stephen.
The poor audience has heard me say this 4 times, so I'll say it quickly. Dark money is the movement of money through various incarnations of entities, corporations, clubs, and money laundering machines, so that the source of the money ultimately becomes very vague or entirely hidden. As mayor, what will you do to get the presence and the influence of dark money out of San Francisco politics?
Thank you, Stephen, for that question, and thank you also for attending our meetings on our campaign finance ordinance that I introduced back in July of last year that's moving through Ethics Commission today. I introduced a measure 6 months ago that is going to increase disclosure and transparency amongst donors that give to independent third-party expenditures, and also extend this to social media ads as well, and require companies to archive all of their political social media ads so that it's available to the city and county of San Francisco. But we all know that that's just the first step. Second, our office has begun work on updating our public financing program. I'm incredibly proud that San Francisco was one of the first to embrace public financing, and I have used it when available every time that I've run. And it really does help level the playing field by ensuring that we are investing public taxpayer dollars in making sure that we have independent candidates that aren't dependent on the wealthiest corporations and the wealthiest individuals to win. And so we've looked, since we started this program in San Francisco, other cities have raced ahead of us. And so we have a 2-to-1 program. New York City and LA now have a 6-to-1 program. Okay, that's much more helpful. And I'm introducing a follow-up ordinance to increase our levels to 6-to-1 as well.
Hi, Jane.
Hi, Ben.
Ben Becker from the Burning Crats. You've already talked tonight about how you have a very ambitious plan to try to raise $1 billion in bonds for housing, for affordable housing in San Francisco. I want to ask you about the public bank. This is what I've been asking everybody. It's locked up in the Board of Supervisors right now. It's been an idea that's been floating around for too long. As mayor, what are you going to do to ensure that it moves out beyond the Board of Supervisors and actually becomes policy to support affordable housing in this city?
So I strongly support public municipal banks. But I think the much more challenging question is how we're going to implement it as quickly as possible. And I think there's a number of challenges to the city and county of San Francisco becoming a bank and figuring out all the mechanisms and services that we would have to provide for it. So an idea that I've been floating is inviting South Dakota to North Dakota, I'm so sorry, North Dakota, which has had a state municipal bank for a very long time, to open a branch here in San Francisco while we get ours off the ground. They have an infrastructure and organization in place, and we can ask them to open a branch here in San Francisco as we kickstart a municipal public bank that San Francisco can run on its own. But that's a way to get it into the ground immediately and invest our public dollars again, our $10 billion budget in a space with an institution that can make sure they're investing that back into our city, back into our small businesses, back into projects that are building affordable and middle-income housing, and making sure that we are really maximizing our dollars, not just in spending it on services and all the great things that we do on it now, but investing the dollars that are waiting to get spent in loans and programs that really help our community.
All right, we have time for an audience question, and even a white man can. But your hand went up really fast, so sorry, white guys.
Hi, thank you. My name is Valerie Ibarra. I'm from the District 4 out in the Sunset. And I'm just wondering, with this kind of housing, this demand for housing, this need for housing, how do you plan to mitigate that need and demand with the strain on local infrastructure, such as water supply, sewage, and, well, you already talked a little bit about transportation.
So, you know, the build mentality has a place, because we certainly need to increase our supply, not just here in San Francisco, but as a region. But if we don't have the infrastructure to keep up with it, then we're not going to be able to support a growing city and be a smart, livable city as we want to. We here in the city assess fees on developers as they build. Fees for schools, for childcare, for transportation, for other types of infrastructure as well. And that covers a certain portion of it. Increased property taxes and values also go into infrastructure as well. And then finally, we've issued several bonds that goes towards a capital improvement plan here in the city and county that works to update our sewage treatment and other types of things. But I really think that one of the most important investments in terms of infrastructure that we can make is on child care, schools, and transportation. We are not keeping up with our growing population, and that is going to take a real investment of public dollars and raising revenue to invest in those things again.
One more question? Somebody's got to run up. I'm not going to go pick.
I'll answer your question later.
Hello, Supervisor. Thank you for being here tonight. So my name is Luis, and I'm also happy to be part of the Latino Young Democratic Executive Board. And yes, thank you. I was part of the San Francisco Commission a couple of years ago. So my question is actually related to the constituents I was entrusted to represent. Quite frankly, looking around the room real quickly, I don't see too many people within, the age of 12 to 23 for a variety of reasons. And as a lot of the candidates have spoken tonight, the demographics of this city and county have changed a lot over the years. And as part of my role through the Youth Commission, I was entrusted to advise the head of the executive branch, which you might potentially be, on the unmet needs of youth and families in the city. And I believe, in my humble opinion, as someone who served as a member of the Board of Education and the Board of Supervisors, you bring a unique repertoire of experience and knowledge. So my question for you is, not just in theory, but in practical policy approaches, what can be done to reverse this trend of youth and families that are no longer able to live in the city? As someone who's lived here since the age of 9, I've been very, what I consider, blessed to be able to grow up in the city and county through all the resources that have been allocated towards me, and I would like to see the same future for other youth and families.
Thank you, Commissioner, for your question. So, a couple of things I'll say. One, I have authored a measure on the ballot with Supervisor Norman Yee, which is a $140 million commercial gross receipts tax on the ballot to make San Francisco's single largest investment ever in early childhood education and child care. And this measure is going to do a number of things. One, it is is going to wipe out or take off 4,200 low-income and homeless families that are on the wait list for childcare today, immediately. Second, we are going to raise subsidies for the first time ever to provide increased dollars for middle-class families up to 200% of average median income so they can also afford childcare and early childhood education here in San Francisco. And finally, this measure is going to increase wages for the first time in a very long time of our childcare workers and early childhood educators who make poverty wages in San Francisco. They make on average $26,000 a year. And 82% of our childcare workers are women of color and immigrant women. So this is absolutely an equity issue because many of these women cannot afford to live anywhere near San Francisco to take care of the residents that we care about, 0 to 5. 2, I have fought for investing public dollars in our public schools again to make up for where the state has failed. I was proud to reauthor then Supervisor Tom Amiano's Public Education Enrichment Fund in 2014, which is bringing over $70 million to our public schools again. That's helping to fund art teachers in our middle schools and PE teachers in our high schools and librarians in our elementary schools and toilet paper in bathrooms. And then finally, we need to continue to invest in strong after-school programs, jobs, and pathways to employment for youth in San Francisco, and of course, more affordable housing.
Thank you, Supervisor. You can have 1 minute for a closing statement. Would that work?
Okay. Sorry, someone was pointing very energetically at the back of the room. Oh, I think we're done with questions, but I promise I'll answer both of your questions after the forum is over. I just want to say that San Francisco deserves a mayor that has as big ideas as the challenges that we are facing today. And I hope that in your time, as you evaluate who your number 1 and number 2 and number 3 choice for mayor will be, that you not just look at our rhetoric and what we're saying in front of you today, but you actually look at our track record. I'm really proud of my track record over the last decade here in San Francisco. I fought to make community college free again here in San Francisco.
Yeah.
I fought and won the most affordable middle-income housing, taking on market rate developers and asking to give back more to San Francisco because we want them to do business in San Francisco, but we don't want them to run San Francisco, which is what we have seen here in the city of San Francisco. Authored with many of you and the San Francisco Tenants Union and the Housing Rights Committee, Eviction Protection 2.0 in 2015, which is the strongest tenant protection ordinance in the country. And since we have passed that legislation, we have seen a decline in these frivolous, greed-incentivized, low-fault evictions that landlords were placing on tenants who were simply hanging their laundry out their window, leaving their bicycles in the hallways, or adding roommates to their room, or owner move-in eviction, where we finally put in place a 5-year vacancy rent control if you commit an OMI in your unit. I was also proud to work with many of you in the San Francisco Labor Council to make San Francisco pass the most progressive minimum wage ordinance in the country, where all of our workers will rise to $15 an hour this July of 2018. My first home growing up here in San Francisco with my immigrant parents was subsidized affordable housing, but that's not the reason why I'm the strongest candidate for affordable housing. I'm the strongest candidate because I have won and negotiated more affordable housing than any city legislator or candidate that has walked in this room. Ideas and fight for you in the mayor's office. We are really at a junction here in our city, and we all feel it. We are losing the city that we love, and I want to be able to work with you to fight back so we can move our city forward again. And we can do that by reinvesting in the very institutions that we have always invested here in this country: housing, education, childcare, our public transportation system. I want to fight for you to push forward progressive revenue measures that is going to be invested back in our city to help regrow our middle class again and support our middle class to stay here in San Francisco. And so I hope that you will consider me this upcoming June 5th in the mayor's race. It has really been an honor to serve the city, and I'm excited to be able to continue to do that at the executive branch of the city and county of San Francisco. Thank you all so much.